Get your house in order. Oh, do
it
today. Get your house.
Where is that coming from?
Because what we're going to talk about today, your house being in order.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of On the Corner of Crenshaw. It's hair, boy.
Oh,
She's
dear.
swinging. Hi. Okay, I'm Brian.
I'm Alexis. Y'all know who we are.
And we're the Crenshaws. So, I had a very interesting thought the other day, and it really got me moving and got me thinking. And there's a scripture in 1 Timothy that says, how can a man rule the house of God and not rule his home? And it really started me thinking just about the dynamics of men and women, both in the home and in church. How there is a seemingly a drive to be something in church, but there's a lack of presence almost in the home. And on the flip side of that, just thinking about the female presence and the female dominance in church, not just from the pulpit, but just in attendance. Mm-hmm. You see a lot of female attendees, and you don't see a lot of men that attend church.
In some ministries.
Yeah, and there are some ministries that have a large male presence, but
they're more so the minority, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think there is well, I don't want to say divide, because I don't think it's this division there, but why do you think that there is more women in church than there are men?
So that's the first question you want me to answer, because there was a lot in just what you said. Okay. I think that for women naturally are wired to submit. And I know a lot of y'all sisters like, no, I ain't. But I believe that it is the plan of God and how something he put in woman to come under. We are the weaker vessel. No matter how independent we are, how smart and brilliant we are physically the weaker vessel. Mm-hmm. And I think that because typically, and this isn't necessarily always the case, but the male is the pastor. Mm-hmm. There are female pastors, but they are the minority. Mm-hmm. That is changing, though. Mm-hmm. I believe. I still don't feel like that women pastors are the majority, but the majority is male pastors, and women can submit. We can follow, we can help to nurture and help to build, and that's attractive both, I think, to both parties, to the male pastor and to the female parishioner, or the mm-hmm. female who, like myself, who feels called to under shepherd, mm-hmm. not to be a senior pastor, but I do have a shepherd's heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's attractive to both, and it falls streamlined to the plan of God. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I do. I honestly think submission plays a really big part in the attendance portion. Submission is like a very broad component when you're talking about church. Mm-hmm. And I think men look at the submission in the realm of church as being less than or weak. Mm-hmm. So you very rarely would find, now times are changing, but there were times where you wouldn't see a man lift his hands, or you wouldn't see a man get on his knees, or you wouldn't see a man cry, or you wouldn't see a man shout or dance because it's quote unquote feminine. Mm-hmm. But I really think that submission plays a very huge part in that, because in a man, it's almost like I'm the one you're supposed to be submitting mm-hmm. to. Mm-hmm. And our definition of submission growing up is you submit to what has authority over you. And men are very logical creatures. So the essence of submitting to God, who you cannot see, who you cannot touch, who you have to believe exists, is almost foreign to a man, because how can somebody that I don't see or somebody I can't touch have authority over me? Does that make sense?
Keep going.
So I think that you have to lay it out in layman's terms. You have to lay it out for a man. Make it make sense almost. Why am I submitting, or why is it okay to submit to God? And it's easy for a woman, like you said, it's easy for a woman to somewhat submit. So here it is, you have a woman that goes to church and her husband not necessarily involved in church because he's like, well, I don't get the point. So now you have this woman who's going to church and gathering all of these principles that she's hearing the pastor say, and she's taking it back home. And you saw that too, right?
Yeah.
She's taking these principles back home, and she's trying to explain, well, this is what the pastor said my home is supposed to look like. Now there's a divide because he's like, well, you listening to that man and you're not listening to this man, which causes the divide.
Especially if it's two different things being said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then you have to figure out, which gets into our topic, how do you balance marriage and ministry? Like the Bible does talk about a sanctified wife sanctifies her husband, but how?
So I want to dive into what you said, and it was a lot of things that you said that sparked a comment. So you mentioned how men are very logical and that it has to make sense. I think that narrative is becoming by gender or gender neutral, because women now are, this is the age of the woman. I think it's the year of the woman, or the generation, season, whatever vernacular you want to choose. But for women now, because we've found our voice, we want to know. It needs to make sense to us too. Also, for men, I believe it does have to make sense, but I believe that a lot of ministries have caught on and are grasping the concept of, for men, you have to know how to include them. And I think the part of submission that we or what goes in harmony or in tandem with submission is honor. And a man, to lead a man, has to respect him, because that's how men, that's their language, respect. Women want to be loved, we want to be secure. Nurture's our thing. For men, respect. We learned that recently.
Amen.
And I think that what will draw the men to church is a pastor or a male voice or female voice who they feel respected by, and that they can honor and they are honored. Honor is bi-directional. Correct. And we are navigating from that context where you just honor the man of God, and absolutely you should, but it's bi-generational. It has to be given and received. Right. And I think that for our previous generation, our parents, which I was raised with my grandparents, you're a second generation of your parents because of the age difference. They, women then just, were seen and not heard, and they submitted to a lot of things that they didn't understand, because things that were explained to us were just like, just do it because, it's the generation of do as I say, not as I do. Right. And that was honestly culturally infused into the church. But now this generation, that doesn't fly. Yeah. Why do I need to come to church? Why do I need to take communion? Why do I need to, when I take communion, put on all of this garb? Why? And I think that there is a generation now, and the bridging of that is just bringing language to that, making that make sense. The logical piece that you were speaking of, that goes for kind of both generation, but both genders, but especially the male, because ain't no dude gonna come to church and listen to another dude tell him all the wrong he's doing, and it's just a one-sided thing, versus now where there's a understanding and a knowledge that has been exposed. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Exposed and given and accepted from leadership is received, and they're giving and they're also listening. It's just become bi-directional on multiple facets. But because that was missing, I think that's where you're seeing a lot of churches where it's a male pastor and a predominant female congregation because of those things.
And honestly, and this may be kind of scripted. However, like, I think, and I'm willing to bet that men realized the value of the help that women offer. Like, you
offer freely,
because women are loyal naturally. You know what I mean? I heard Apostle say this the other day. Women are like naturally loyal. Women,
we came out of man.
Right. So, he used the example, when they put when Jesus was in the tomb, like, the women, they stood, like, if he said he gonna rise, I'm gonna be here to and I think men found value in that. And honestly, they realized that there is a component, we've learned over the years that being a pastor is more than just being able to preach across the pulpit. And there are a lot of pastors who can preach but cannot administrate. So they understood the value of women who are naturally loyal, one, but can also administrate. And so now you're hitting on all cylinders. And that's not necessarily, obviously it's not all the way across the board, but I'm willing to bet that somewhere along the line, a man said, you know what? This would really help me. Like, I could get a lot more accomplished with her help than I would trying to rule over her. And you know what I mean? But there has to be a balance. That's what we really want to talk about. Just the balance of marriage and ministry, because sometimes the roles are reversed. Sometimes the woman has the, predominant aggressive approach, and the man is the administrator. How do you balance that with home responsibilities? Men aren't natural nurturers. So if you have children involved, that's kind of hard, because she's dominant in the church, but there has to be some kind of like softness, toward nurturing the children. Does that make sense? Like, so what I'm saying is, if you are the face of the ministry, if you are the pastor and you're like the aggressive, you're the pastor, you're the preacher, you're the hooper, you're the hollerer, whatever, and the man is the soft-spoken, how does that translate at home when the man is not the natural nurturer?
When you say translate, help me understand what you mean, or how does that operate? How does that flow?
Yeah, how does that happen?
I think communication has to be key, and understanding of roles in the sense of environments. Because at home how we operate at home doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same way that we operate at church or in ministry. And I think that an understanding has to be established. And honestly, security has to be really
major
managed regarding that. I know when, for us, literally a week before I birthed my son, I was elevated, installed. I don't think it's installed. Whatever the proper term is, to the pastor of Christian education. At that time, my husband was still a minister. And we had so much going on at the time. I vaguely remember a lot of those things. 2 kids under 2 in diapers, breastfeeding. Yeah. However, for me, I was super intentional of never rubbing that in your face. Mm-hmm. I really didn't like when people called me pastor. Still don't like when people call me Pastor Alexis. I just, because of, I don't want to say the negative connotation that's attached to it, but the responsibility, internally the responsibility. And then I don't think people always understand that I don't have my own church. Literally, I am an under shepherd. I assist my pastor in overseeing and managing the Christian education component of our ministry.
Right.
And I've always felt called to under shepherd, always. I have a pastor's heart, and I'm going to get back to your question. I have a pastor's heart, but I've never felt the weight of senior pastorship or the call of it. Never. But for me, I really just did what I was asked to do, called to do in that function and role, but I didn't let the title go to my head. Mm-hmm. Because you were my husband, whether we left the ministry, whether we, moved to another state, whether, I don't know, Apostle woke up and was like, God said, your time is up. I still was going to be Alexis Crenshaw, Brian Crenshaw's wife. And I'm very cognitive of that. I think also because of just the things that I've seen in ministry, in our personal ministry, with the church that we're a part of, as well as other ministries as I matriculated through life. I just didn't want to, and I've always, been attached to ministries where the husband and wife worked in tandem on some level. Mm-hmm. And it was a strong woman's ministry presence. I've always been attached or been attracted or drawn or attached myself to ministries like that. And I've just seen some things that I did not want to duplicate. Mm-hmm. I didn't. And I don't think that they were intentional. It's just human nature. You're the man, I'm the woman. Naturally, because we subscribe and submit ourselves to biblical principles, the man is the head, the woman comes under. But sometimes, like you said, the woman is the more charismatic voice. Mm-hmm. And I've seen just where some husbands just didn't digest that well. And for me, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, and all of this is our opinion, to me, I never wanted that to be the case. So I was super almost hiding a little bit because I didn't want that to be the case. I love my husband, and I never wanted that to be a place of contention. So I was super intentional about just not doing that and really putting, to further answer your question, in the balance for me. And my first lady gets on me all the time, like, Alexis, you can do both. For me, my family comes first, my husband and my kids. So if my husband got something to do and my kids have to be, watched, and I get asked for a ministry engagement, I'm trying to balance all of that, and I'll let that go before I'm wondering about my kids or my husband's not able to do what he needs to do. Mm-hmm. That's what I feel called to do in my life. Again, I'm still figuring that out. Mm-hmm. And navigating that. And as my children are getting older, that's easier for me. But when they were younger, like my pastor literally told me, he's like, Alexis, I'm not going to ask you to preach anymore. Because every time he did, I had an excuse. Part of that was like, and I'm being super transparent, if you want me to come preach, I will. Please ask me. But I never wanted it to be a thing between us. And I think for us, that was low-key beneficial. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you feel regarding it, but I never wanted it to be a question. I wanted you to always know that regardless to if I preach or teach, I'm still your wife. And that's so important to me. Mm-hmm. I realize I can have both. I'm going to shut up in a minute. I realize I can have both. And I realize that God called me to this before my husband and before my children. And I'm still learning that balance. But because of the things that I have witnessed, I never wanted that to be a thing. So I think that helped our balance because you never have to worry about, coming home, your food being cooked, you do the laundry. Or your kids being taken care of. Because I messed up the man of God's clothes, so he took over laundry a couple of years ago. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes. So for me, it was, I'm always the center of attention.
Amen.
I mean, I don't ask for it. That's just my personality. Mm-hmm. I walk into a room and I'm the life. You're going to know Brian Crenshaw is in the room, whether it's something I'm wearing, whether it's my walk. I remember you told me one day when we first started dating, you was like, you just have like this walk about you. And I didn't think about it, but like literally when I walk into a room, you're going to know, I don't know who he is, but he's somebody.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that was just, I thought it was natural. I didn't think I had anything supernatural. I just thought it was who I was.
Wow.
And for a long time, you used to say this, and I didn't understand the magnitude of it. But you said, I don't like going places because people don't know who I am. They know me as Brian Crenshaw's wife. And I used to say, well, what's wrong with that? Like, you're Brian Crenshaw's wife. Like, I acknowledge you. They acknowledge you. And I just kind of went on about my business. Like I didn't think it was anything supernatural. However, like I noticed I never stopped being me, but maybe in the past 2-3 years or so, you started to like come forth and just be and I'm like, oh, this is good. Like we can do this together. Like I can be the center of attention. She can be the center of attention, and we can do this together. And I went somewhere without her. Now, I'm being very honest with you. Now I go everywhere, and people are like, "Oh yeah, you Brian Crenshaw." I went somewhere, and a lady says, "That's Alexis Crenshaw husband," and I said, "Oh, wait a minute, like, hold on." I don't have a name. Like, I don't have a status. So, like, for a very split second, that did something to me because, I mean, it didn't throw a wedge in between us or anything, but it did something to my psyche because I, for a minute, understood how minute it was, but it kind of makes you feel insignificant. Like, I'm Alexis Crenshaw's husband. Like, I have a name. You know what I mean? And so I understood how you felt. And it made me have a deeper respect for the things that you used to tell me. And so there's a balance now that I make sure when we go places, she's not Brian Crenshaw's wife. She's Alexis Crenshaw. And I make that assurance across the board at home, and at church, and we really both have strong titles and strong positions in our church. We're both auxiliary pastors in our church, and it can easily be, taken out of context because of the positions that we hold. Even though I'm a pastor and she's a pastor, she serves under me in the music department, and I serve under her in the Christian education department. So we are very intentional. I think we're working on that, being very intentional on how to balance our ministry responsibilities with our home. We try to make sure that our children are, the forefront. And just kind of a sidebar, we want to raise balanced children.
Yes.
I want my children to love what I love, but I also want my children to find a passion of their own. My son, bless my life, when we were at church, he said he wanted to sing. And we were at rehearsal one night and he was singing. And we're both very talented and gifted. But my son started singing and he started matching pitch. My son's 5 or 4. He'll be 5 in January, but he's 4 and he matched pitch very well. And it kind of surprised me. So I asked him and I said, do you want to sing? And you know, most children are like, yeah. But when they see people, it's almost like
They get shy.
They get real shy and they don't want to do it. But my son, he blessed me because he walked up to me on Sunday and he said, Daddy, can I sing? And I said, yeah, sure. Do you want to stand over here by me and sing? He was like, no, I want to go up front. So I let him go up front. And when I tell you, he blessed my entire life. He was so brave. He was so courageous. And you would have thought that he was the actual praise and worship leader because he was just, hey, I'm here. I'm doing what I love. And, you know, it blessed me because we spend time with them at night. We spend time with them, you know, when they're home. We don't drill church. No, church is very important and we won't ever forsake that.
Yeah.
However, I was very glad that I saw his passion come forth in something that we're instilling in him.
Yeah.
So that's that whole balance piece.
Yeah. I wanted to add, I want to cut you off. I wanted to add that it's balance and management, because we are humans, and you know, you can't tell now probably, but probably like I guess 2 years ago now, I lost 100 pounds on keto. I launched a keto business. I was a keto consultant. And in that time, literally, like my husband said, I kind of rose to the front. I had lost my grandmother and I was just stricken with grief. And that was kind of how I navigated to land, if you will, from the sea of grief that I was in. And with that, it brought a level of notoriety that I wasn't used to. I'm not a naturally outwardly prideful person. I do deal with pride, but it's I don't want nobody to help me. Don't nobody look at me, you know, extra kind of pride. You know what I'm saying? Not the arrogant, look at me, I'm all that kind of pride. Both are wrong though, you know, shameless plug. So because of that, you know, people were noticing and I had to be very intentional with my witness, with what I posted. Shameless plug, y'all, if y'all married and y'all going through, don't
post
subliminally posting stuff on Facebook, okay? Get you a journal, get you a friend, and just text them what you want to say, or write it down and give it to them. One thing that we use is Marco Polo. And when he really makes me mad and I don't want to talk to him, I will Marco Polo him. And we're having the dialogue, but I'm not cut off and I can do it in my own space. Anyway, back to what we were saying. You have to balance marriage and ministry, but you also have to manage it too. Because I think for Brian, because he is very extroverted and used to that, he had to get to a place, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for you, to where if he's not careful in managing that, it could cause a wedge. I'm his wife. Literally, the Bible says the two become one. So we're in essence one. So if I'm getting notoriety, he's getting notoriety. But there's a balance and a management that he has and I have. When people acknowledge me, I still have to acknowledge him in front of them. And that's not a pomp and circumstance. That's a management implication. You know, he had to do that because he is a musician and he gets a lot of attention, and there's a lot of females who don't respect the fact that he's married. So in those different things, and because he's naturally extroverted, and he's an entertainer, and he could see no harm in certain things, but he has to manage that because he has a wife. And that's just balancing and managing in ministry. And whatever that ministry is, it doesn't have to be pulpit ministry. It could be music ministry. It could be teaching ministry. It could be missionaries or missions or anything in the like, anything that serves and edifies and brings glory to God. There has to be a balance of considering your spouse, but a management, because there's things that don't bother him that bothered me. And he had to take that into consideration and navigate or manage that terrain, vice versa. You know what I mean? There was times when I would post, because he would be traveling. I hope you don't mind me saying this. If you need to edit out. And I would post being at home with the kids, but I wouldn't tag him. And he would say to me, "You're not a single parent, Alexis." And I'm like, "What do you mean? You out there in the nation strumming your bass. I'm at the house with the kids." But still including him in that. When he's not here, talking to the kids and saying, "Well, me and daddy," even in his absence, those are things that we do to balance. When I am now, off doing things and I'm talking to him, he'll put me on speaker so the kids can hear me, because it's important, especially to me. I think to you too, that we still are involved. What's going on at home while we're off doing things for ministry or off doing things for work and those sorts of things too. So there's a balance and there's a management.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you understand that you can't not have one without the other.
Right.
Like balance without management, it's going it's eventually going to be one-sided.
Right.
And
wow, even if you establish the balance, if you don't manage it, it's going to fall.
It's going to be one-sided. And even in our preaching styles, I've learned now to, like, people will subconsciously compare. Alexis is the natural born teacher. Like, she can teach you under a bench and you'll be like, what?
Oh,
Like, she could take a book and rewrite the book and you would be like, that's very interesting. But she's the natural teacher. Me, I'm the preacher. And that's where I thrive, because I'm very extroverted. I'm very charismatic. I'm very, in tune to that kind of thing. To her, it matters, but it's not at the top of her priority list. And when we started both really going forth in pulpit ministry, I really prayed and I said, and because like you, I've watched that particular instance drive a wedge between two married couples. I've watched it drive a wedge in homes where she outpreached him and he outpreached her, or she's the more dominant one, or he's the more, deliverance preacher. So he getting more calls or she's getting more calls. And it was just a thing. And I did not want that. So I remember praying, God, really give us, clear boundaries when it comes to that. Because you are called to who you are called to. I'm called to who I'm called to. And we're called to who we're called to. You know what I mean? Like, there are people who will listen to us that won't listen to me by myself.
Wow. You think?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are people that will listen to us that won't listen to you by yourself.
Probably.
You see what I'm saying? Because what we have together is different and more powerful than what we have, individually. It doesn't take away from what we have individually. It just adds to it. Yeah. But we have to be very confident and conscious of what it is that we have, and we have to stay in that lane. Now, I can teach, but I'm not the predominant teacher. So you won't ever see me chomping at the bits to teach a class. You know what I mean? Now, you call me to preach somewhere, I'm pretty much on board.
It's crazy because we're opposites. I never forget one Sunday, things got mixed up at church, and people showed up to be taught Sunday school.
Right.
And I had no idea. There was a mix-up. Something was going on. Apostle was out of town. And I was like, okay. And we took a scripture, and I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Something about the potter's wheel.
Yeah.
That scripture.
Yep.
And I literally taught on spot. That is my oil. Preaching, we'll have a prayer service. Now I could pray, but as far as that whole thing, that's not my natural at this season of my life. And I hope one day I can look back, at this and be like, I remember when I couldn't. But that's just not my natural pull or gravitation. And I'm a charismatic teacher. I love Joyce Myers, and she's charismatic too in her own right. But I'm definitely a charismatic teacher, but teaching is definitely my niche.
And that's very interesting that you said that about like on the spot teaching, because if you remember, like
7 last words.
Apostle did this. Shout out to our apostle and our lady, Apostle James.
Our lady. Our pastors.
Apostle James L. Spence and Lady Suzette Spence of the Word Empowerment Church. We love them. Apostle literally, I call myself the worker, because Apostle knows that he can literally at any moment call me to do anything. And if it's in my power, it's gonna get done. Apostle literally called me that day and said, hey, we need a musician. I said, okay, cool. We found a musician. He didn't need me to play anymore. He said, I need you to do praise and worship. I said, okay. The praise and worship leader walked in. He didn't need me to do praise and worship anymore. So at that moment, I was just an attendee. I wasn't doing anything. 7 last sayings. It was literally right before the preacher was getting ready to preach. Now I just drew a blank. What was my?
I think it was number 4.
I think I was number 4, something like that.
Was it at Thirst?
No, it was today you will live with me in paradise.
That's number 2.
Was it number 2? I don't know, but anyway, it was one of those. And literally, right before the person before me sat down, we realized that the person that was supposed to be preaching that 7 last saying was not there.
My lamb.
This person was closing. He leans over to me and he said, 7 minutes, come strong. I had no Bible. I had no thought.
Man of God, you go to church with no Bible?
It was on my phone, but like... So I'm sitting there trepidated because I'm like, oh, I'm about to bomb.
You did really good though.
And so I stood and literally, I think it was the worst sermon of my life. But everybody says I did amazing. However, I was able to deliver because that's naturally in me.
Yeah. Let it have been his wife. We would have prayed one of them last sayings that day.
Yeah, so we have really learned how to, and we're still navigating through how to navigate our ministry responsibilities and our home. And I have to say that I think we're doing a great job of that. I admonish you guys that if you're having that, just literally pray together. And really be on one accord as it pertains to your prayers in regards to how you manage home, how you manage ministry, how you manage your children, how you manage your individual calls. But it literally has to start with, like you said, balance and managing. So that's that.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. We out.